After my previous video on building custom GPTs, many people asked me for an in-depth explanation of the Make setup. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to create a scenario in Make with webhooks and how to leverage a single webhook to fulfill multiple requests using routers and filters. So without further ado, let's dive in. So before we jump into Make to build our scenario, let's quickly come up with a game plan. So let's type it out here. So whenever you build an automation scenario in any tool like Zapier or Make, you have at least two things in the scenario. The first thing is a trigger, and the second thing happens to be an action. So trigger is what invokes the workflow, and then action is what you want the workflow to do on your behalf when you start the workflow. So we have a trigger and an action. So in our case, in today's video, what we are going to focus on is using a webhook as our trigger. Once you create a webhook, what you get is a URL which is unique to that particular webhook. And whenever you want to invoke this scenario, you're going to make a call to this URL, and that will give the scenario an indication that it is time to take some action. And when we talk about the actions, it can be anything. It can be any application that Make already talks to. It can be a project management application. It can be a to-do list application. It can be maybe an invoice generator, a document generator, you name it. Like these are thousands of different applications that you can invoke as an action from your Make scenario. And for today's video, I'm going to leverage an application known as Todoist. And just to show you what it looks like, you have a typical to-do list application. You can come in here and you can add tasks, and then you can list your tasks and then check them off once you're done with them. So pretty simple setup, but it has a super handy Make connector. So that is exactly what we are going to leverage for this particular video. Perfect. So once you invoke the webhook, this goes into the next part, which is calling the Todoist application, and then it can do anything that you want it to do. For our case, what we are going to do is there are two things that we want to do. We want to add a to-do, and then we should also be able to list all the to-do items, list all the to-dos. Now, there are two different things, but the problem is that we can only do one of them at a time. We can either add a to-do or we can list all the to-dos. So one action is not going to cut it. So what we need to do instead is we need to create two actions, one to represent each of these things that we want to do. So one here, one here. So this one will be to add a to-do, and this one will be to list all the to-dos. But now our webhook, or in our scenario, we only have a connection going from our webhook to the first connector here, which is the Todoist add a to-do connector. But we also want to be able to connect to this one over here. So we can certainly do that. But now the problem is, how would the webhook know, or how would the scenario know which direction to choose? How should it decide whether to add a to-do or list all the to-dos? There has to be some kind of a decision point in the middle to decide whether to go left or whether to go here or to here. So how do we do that? So to do that, we are going to introduce something here in the middle known as a router. So I'm just going to make a small box to represent the router, something like that. And then all the calls from our trigger are going to go into the router, and then router will have some data in it to be able to decide which direction to go into. So whether it's going to add a to-do or it's going to list all the to-dos. So it needs some kind of a data point here in the middle to be able to decide whether to go here or to go here. And for that, what we can do is we can send some data. So whoever is making the call to the webhook, so whatever app is calling the webhook can, with the call, send some data along, which will help the webhook decide what to do when it gets to the router, right? So here we will send some data, which will basically be our intention. This data is nothing but the intention of the call, that we are making this call because we are going to add a to-do, or we are making this call because we want to get all the to-dos back. So we have to pass in this intention somehow to the webhook. And there are two ways to do that. The two ways that I'm going to show you today. So two ways to pass the intention. So first way is to use something known as a query parameter. So in this case, what will happen is whatever the URL we have next to the URL, so let's say this is a URL. Let me make this even bigger. Next to the URL, we will say question mark, a type equals add, right? So it can be type equals add, which the router can read. It will know the type is add, then it will go into this direction. Or the type can be list, and then we'll know, okay, the type is list, so let's go into this direction. So we can either use the query parameter method, which is our first option. The second option is what's known as the request header. So we can either use the query param or the request header. And the request header can be of two types. So it can be of type post or it can be of type get. And this is something you pass in when you're making this call from here to here, right? So we can tell it that the request is of type post and the request is of type get. So post is typically used when you want to add something and get is typically used when you want to list something. So we can use one of these options. Both of them are valid, and I'm going to show you how to do both of them. So at this point, I think we have everything that we need to move over to make and start building our scenario. Very good. So yeah, and I'll keep coming back to it to refer to our game plan, but we'll go one step at a time. So let's go over to make, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on create a new scenario button here. And just like we started with a blank canvas here, we start with a blank canvas on make as well. And then we start by adding the different components that we need. But the first one is always going to be a trigger. So in this case, our trigger, if you remember, is going to be a webhook. So what we do is we click on this plus button and then we type webhook because it is one of the connectors that we are going to use. And once you type webhook, it should filter down. And as we can see here on the top, we get the option to use webhooks. And you might see multiple webhooks option, but you want to look for this one, which is the native webhook that is supported by Make. So we click on this, and then it's going to give me an option. And there's different types of webhooks as well. There's a mail hook, there's a webhook, and there's one more thing that we'll talk about later. But we are going to use this thing called custom webhook. And you click on this to set that up. So now we have our trigger, which is this part over here. And as I said, it is going to give us a URL. So if we go here and see if we have a URL, we don't have one yet because it is asking me, hey, which webhook do you want to use? Because I've created several webhooks in the past and it is giving me an option if I want to use one of the existing ones. But what I want to do for this video is I want to add a new webhook. So I'm creating a brand new webhook here. So I'll just call it YT demo webhook. Click on save. And as soon as I create this webhook, look at that. We get the URL that I mentioned we are going to get when we create a new webhook. So this over here is now available to us over here. And what we can do is we can actually copy this URL to our clipboard so that we can call this webhook. And you might be wondering, why do we need to call this webhook? Because our scenario isn't even set up yet. But the reason we want to call the webhook even before we have set up anything is because we want to tell it what kind of data it should be expecting, right? Look at this over here. It is currently listening and is expecting you to make a webhook call so that it can understand what kind of data it can expect to receive whenever this webhook is invoked. And to do that, all you have to do is open a new window in your browser, a new tab in your browser. You type the URL, and if I hit enter, what you will get is something called accepted. And if you go back to make, now it will say successfully determined. So what it has done is basically it has determined what kind of request we made. And if you look here, we did not send any data. We did not have any query parameters here. So it will think that this particular webhook is not going to send any custom data along with it. But that, of course, is not correct. But what we want to do is we want to tell it that, hey, we are going to be sending this query param called type so that you can determine which path to take here, which is the add path or the list path. So we go back to the webhook, and this time, actually, before we do that, we have to go back to make and click out of this and then click on this again. And then you get an option to redetermine the data structure. So although it already knows what kind of data to expect, you can tell it that, hey, things have changed. So let's redetermine and reconfigure, right? So we click on redetermine data structure and it is going to start listening again. And this time I'm also going to pass type equals a list. The value here actually doesn't matter. It can just be value because the thing that matters to us is that it knows of the query param that is going to be coming in with this data. So hit enter and now it's accepted again. And if we go here, it says successfully determined. Very good. So now we can click on OK. So our webhook is all ready to go. And the next thing, now that we have our trigger and webhook ready to go, the next thing we want to do is want to add the Todoist block. So we will go here, we'll click on plus, and then I'm going to search for Todoist. There we go, click on Todoist. And then it's going to give you a bunch of different options. For this particular one, I'm going to use the one called create a task. Let's look for this here, create a task, there we go. And then same thing, you have to go through the setup, which Todoist you want to use, what is the value of the task that you are going to create. So for now, I'm just going to say task, and everything else can be empty. I'll just add it to the inbox. and blah, 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 blah. Click on OK. And that's pretty much it. So if we want to test that our Todoist connection is working correctly, we can just right click on it and we can click on run this module only. So it is going to run and it says successful. It turned green. So if I go over to my Todoist application, I will see that there is a test task indeed. So let's click this so that it's gone. So this connection is working correctly. So that means that this whole thing should be working correctly, which is if I go to my webhook and if I just make a call, actually before that, we need to turn this on. It's currently turned off, so we can turn it on. And now if I call my webhook, it will automatically create a new task. So if I go here, and for right now, the value doesn't even matter because we only have one type of call. So I'm just going to hit enter and it says accepted. And let's come to Todoist and see. So the test task appeared again because we just made this call, which was accepted, which triggered our webhook, and then it called the Todoist application to create a new task. Now, the one thing is that currently our task is hard-coded. That's not the best way to use a webhook. Of course, we want to be able to send the data along with the webhook so that it can dynamically create new tasks. So how do we do that? So we'll have to do the same thing in the query params over here. We will have to add one more param, and we can do that by using the ampersand key, and then we'll say task equals task description. So in addition to sending the type of the call, we can also send the data that is used to create the task. So here in the data part, now we are sending not one thing, but two things. One is the type. Let me pull that. And then we're also sending the description of the task. So now we can use this to actually create the task dynamically. But again, we'll have to redetermine the data structure. So let me go back here and click on this, and I'll say redetermine data structure. And when I come here, I will say the first thing to expect is type, and the second thing to expect is the description. So there we go. So now if I hit enter, it was accepted. Go back here, it says successfully determined. But it is determined, but how do we know what exactly it thinks of the data, what exactly it is expecting? So now that we have this thing set up, we can actually check what our webhook is going to provide to the Todoist block. So if you click on here, you can either manually type the task, which we did, or check this out. Now we see under the webhook, there are two variables available for us to use. One is a type variable and one is a task variable. And both of them came because we, in the determine data structure step, we pass them in. So the webhook configuration now knows that there's two types of variables, a type and task, that it can use further in the make scenario. Very good. So now what I'm going to do is, instead of typing the task here, I'm just going to pick the task. And now whatever I pass in this variable in my URL over here is going to end up in my to-do inbox. Very good. So let's click on OK. And let's click on save. And make sure that's still running. Very good. So now let's create another task. So this time I will say this task is coming from the browser. Hit enter. It is accepted. And let's check Todoist. So it says this is coming from the browser because I passed in this task along with the task query parameter, and it went to the webhook, and then webhook passed it on to the Todoist block. Very good. So all the data is flowing correctly. But so far, the only thing that we are able to do is that we are able to create a new task. So far, we have not done anything about the router or the listing of the tasks, but we can do that now. So to make this router happen, what we need to do is go back to make, and in the middle, you see this wrench icon. You click on this, and you can say add a router. So as soon as I click on add a router, it is going to add this green box in the middle, and it will automatically connect it to the first part over here. So remember when we were working in the Miro board, we had this connection from here to here because we still haven't added this part in the make scenario, but we can do that now. So what we need to do is we can click on this plus button here, and now all of a sudden we have two branches, one going up and one going down. And for this one over here, we can also add another Todoist block. And instead of using it to create a task, we can use it to list the uncompleted task, which is exactly what we want to do. So we click on that, and we are going to configure it as well. It is going to ask me which projects should I be retrieving the task from. So I'll click on inbox for now, because that is where we have been adding our tasks. And then I'm going to limit it to 5 tasks for now. Click on OK. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just quickly check this module. And there we go. So it is able to pull back all the tasks. So this is the first task. This is coming from the browser, and we should have another one, which is our test task. So this is the bundle 1. There we go. So this is the bundle 2 test task. So both the tasks were pulled in correctly. Very good. But now we have the router, but we still haven't told it how to decide how to go here or here. And for that, we need to use the data that we are sending to the webhook, as well as something known as a filter. So the way you add a filter is you will click on this wrench icon between the router and the Todoist blocks. So you click on the wrench icon and you will say set up a filter. So this one will ask me what is the condition when I should be going on this direction. It needs to know what condition should be true for me to go and create a new task. So we will say the condition that you need to be looking for is type, because that is exactly what we are sending in our webhook. And the type should be equals to add, meaning we are adding a to-do. So whenever the type is of type add, we are going to go in this direction. And we can even name this this filter. We'll say add case. Click on OK. So whenever we have the situation of adding a to-do, it will go in this direction. And then for the other one, since we only have one more option, what we are going to do is we're going to click on this and we're going to set up a filter, and we will say that this is a fallback route, meaning whenever this scenario is not true, go into this scenario. Or we can make it a conditional scenario, which is when the type is of list, go here. But given we only have 2 scenarios, this one will either be true or this one will be false. And whenever it is false, it will go into this one. So all we have to do is click on this. In this case, we will say this is the else case, meaning when add is not true. And it will, in that situation, assume that if you're not adding, you must be listing. And we will say this is a fallback route. Fallback means use this as a catch-all else scenario. When none of the other conditions are true, just assume this one is true and go with this. So it's almost if and else. If add is true, go here, else, go here. So our setup is almost complete, but there's one thing still missing, which is when we add a to-do, we can assume that, okay, the scenario will go through and add a to-do, and we assume things are all good. But in this case, it is going to fetch the to-dos, right? But in this case, it is going to fetch the to-dos. But how do we know that it has actually fetched the to-dos, and how do we actually get them back to wherever the call was made? Because remember, there could be an application which is making this call, and if it is asking the webhook to retrieve the to-dos, it must be interested in getting those to-dos back. So how do we send these to-do items back to the original application which made the call in the first place? For that, what we have to use is something known as a webhook response. So the way you do that is you're going to click here on the plus button, and then you're going to click on webhooks again. And instead of now you are not even going to get an option to have another webhook, because we can only have one trigger per scenario. So the only option you get now is an action. And one of the actions that webhooks support is a webhook response. So what happens is whenever we make a call using a webhook, we do whatever we need to do, then we can respond back to the application with some data on the way backwards. So we can just say, okay, got it. Like we can say, got all the to-do. Whatever we want to return from here, we can just return from here. So click on OK, save. And if I go back here and make a call, so I'm going to remove the type add to type list. And it says, okay, got all the to-dos. But we actually didn't get the to-dos. Make got them. They are here, but they were not sent back. So to send them back, what we are going to do now is we are going to select something that the Todoist response is sending us back. So here we can see all the things that are coming back from Todoist. So one of the things that it sends back is the total number of bundles, meaning total number of to-dos it was able to fetch. So for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to return got total number of bundles. So 2 in this case, to-dos back from Todoist. So if we click on OK now and save the scenario and go back to the browser and hit this one again, now we will say, now it says got two to-dos back from Todoist. So now this is real data coming from Todoist. So far we still don't have the actual to-dos, but we have the number of to-dos coming back. So if I was to go here and add one more to-do, and then if I make this call again, now it says I got 3 to-dos. So this is real data coming from Todoist. It is able to tell the number of to-dos there. So definitely the connection is working. To actually send the to-dos back, there's one more thing we need to do here, but I'll save that for another video. For that, we have to use something known as an array aggregator to collect all the to-dos coming back and then send them back as a single response. But that's for another video. For today, I just want to focus on the actual webhook setup. So we'll continue. So we got the response back. We are able to add and we are also able to list. So all of this is working correctly. And just to clean things up, we are also going to add a webhook response here, because any application that is making the call should technically be told that whether the to-do was set up correctly or not. So we will make what we'll do here is we can send the task ID back as an indication that the to-do was correctly added. So if we click here and save, and let me add a to-do again. So we'll say type equals add and task equals test response. And if I hit enter, so now it's returning the ID of the task that was created. So with this, we can assume, or the application that is calling the webhook can assume, okay, that this actually worked correctly. And of course, you can be more robust with the response that you're sending back. You can send more data. If there's an error, you can send that as well. But I'll just leave it at that basic setup for now. So just to recap, we added a webhook. We added two Todoist modules, one to create a task and one to list uncompleted task. And then we added a router to differentiate between whether to go into the add case or to go into the else case, which is to list the task. And the way we do that is by using a filter where we leverage the query param that is coming with the URL called type. And if it is of type add, it goes into this location. Otherwise, it goes into this space over here. Very good. So that takes care of this first method that I wanted to show you, which is using the query param. But there's also another method that I mentioned, which is using the request header. And for this, what we need to do is, first of all, take this URL and close this browser. And I'm going to go into Postman, where I will create a new call. So remember, I mentioned there are two types of calls. There's a get call or a post call. To do that, to make this differentiation, we have to use something called Postman or any other similar tool. So I'm going to copy or paste the URL here. So it automatically detects that there are two query params. There's type and task, and this is of type get at the moment. So let's leave it as is for now. Okay, so far we have talked about the first way, which is using a query parameter along with our webhook. The second one, which we haven't done so far, is known as this is known as HTTP method. This is not a request header. This is an HTTP method name. So basically the method can be of different types. It can be of type post or it can be of type get. And there are other ways as well. But for now, we just want to focus on post and get, because all we want to do is either add a task, which will be of type post, or get all the tasks, which will be of type get. So it's known as the HTTP method. And to make this happen, we need to go all the way back to make and then back to the webhook. Click on the webhook, click on settings, and then click on edit over here, and then click on show advanced settings. And here you will see a question called get request HTTP method, right? This is exactly what we need. By turning that on, what will happen is it is going to pass along as data the method by which the call was made. So it will be of type post or it will be of type get. And with that, we can leverage it to decide whether to go over here or to go over here. So we go here when we want to make a post call, and we go here when we have made a get call. Very good. So let's go back here and let's turn this one on to yes and click on save. And sometimes it takes a second to update. But essentially, when we come to the filter now, instead of relying on the condition that we were relying on so far, the type condition, we are going to rely on the method. And in the method, we will say if it's of type post, and these are standard methods. So we know that when we make a post call, what we are going to get here is the string post. So we click on OK. And for this one, again, we can just leave it as is because it is our backup case. Typically, if this was your main case, you would say the method is of type get. And actually, we can add that here as well. It doesn't hurt. So now we have the first case should be renamed to post, and the second case should be renamed to get. This will actually be ignored because this is our fallback route. So if it's not post, it is going to come here. Even if it's put or whatever, it is still going to come here. So this actually doesn't matter. So we should just remove it because we can avoid confusion this way. Very good. So now instead of relying on the type query parameter, we are relying on the HTTP method. So we can save the scenario again. And now to test it, we'll go back to Postman and we will go here, and we already have the URL. So I'm going to uncheck these because when we make a get call, we don't really need to pass in any query parameters. And I'm going to click on send and let's see what we get. So just like last time we saw in the browser, we are getting got 4 to-dos back from Todoist. Very good. Now to make a post call, what we need to do is we need to click on post, and now we are going to pass in the task as this one is coming from Postman. And now this is the post call, and then we are going to click on send, and now we get the ID back. And if you go back to Todoist, we will see that this task which we added from Postman is already here. Now, one thing to note is typically in a post call, you are not going to send a query param like this because that defeats the purpose of using a post call. You are going to send it in the body part of the call, but I won't get into the details of that in this particular video. I just wanted to show you how to set up the webhook and how to use the router as well as the filters to differentiate between different paths within your make scenario. So with that, what you can do is you have a webhook which you can call from any location. It can be from your custom GPT or it can be from any other application, and you can do all sorts of things. And these two don't even have to be same. This can be Todoist, this can be something else, and you can have many different kinds of applications going out from the router. And especially if you're going to have a lot of them, you can rely on the query param of type, and you can send it that, hey, in this type go here, in this type go here. So there's many different ways you can use this, and you can do all sorts of things with it, and it opens up a ton of possibilities. You can really get creative with this stuff, but this is a pretty powerful tool to have in your tool belt to be able to build a webhook like this and leverage it to add or get data from different applications. All right, so with that, we'll stop here for this one, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for making it all the way to the end of the video. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to access the full course, you can look for the link in the description below or on my website, nocodeuniversity.net. I'll see you in the next one.